Chargers. Touchdown, UCLA.
With USC great and NFL stud, Frostee Rucker.
The Trojans back in front.
And LAFB founder Ryan Dyrud on the Believe Podcast Network and LAFBnetwork.com. This is your destination for Los Angeles football.
What's up, Los Angeles? Welcome into another edition of the LA Football Podcast here on the LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com, your destination for your favorite Los Angeles football teams. We're also on the Believe Podcast Network. Everywhere you listen to podcasts, we are also on YouTube at LAFB Network. Would love it if you'd hit that subscribe button as you visit us and help us keep growing our channel as we continue to put out LA football content for you on the daily. Got a great show today, more Charger specific, as Dan Wade from the Locked On Chargers podcast. He is also a contributor right here at the LA Football Network covering the Chargers. He's going to jump on with me, and we're going to talk a little Chargers training camp, expectations, some camp battles we're looking forward to, some possible odd guys out that could surprise people. And then we'll end the show with our predicted winner of training camp. So which player will be the biggest winner when all is said and done with Chargers camp. So great show, brought to you always by betonline.ag. Make sure to hit the betonline.ag today, whether it's mobile or desktop. Sign up and you'll get a 50% welcome bonus. Plenty of prop bets. Can pick the NFL futures, who's going to win the Super Bowl this year, potential MVP, division winners, all that you can find right on betonline.ag. Tell them the guys at LAFB sent you and get a 50% welcome bonus. All right. Well, hope everyone's having a great week. Let's keep the intro short and sweet. Let's just jump right in to my chat with Dan Wade. What's up, Chargers fans? Like I said in the intro, extremely excited to welcome on the great Dan Wade at Dan Talks Sports on Twitter. He is the co-host of the Locked On Chargers podcast and also a contributor and writer right here for the LA Football Network. My man, Dan, good seeing you. How's it going? How's life been?
Doing good, man. I mean, I think adjusting like everyone else as the world returns to some sort of normalcy, right? But hey, for the dead period of the Chargers to be, getting closer and closer to getting to training camp, I mean, that's definitely what's on my mind right now. I cannot wait to start getting some fresh Chargers content. First training camp under Brandon Staley and this new coaching staff. 17 public practices that will be open. I mean, that's what I'm excited about right now, so I'm counting down the days.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait. Before we really get into Chargers training camp, in this dead period, are you guys at Locked On? Are you still doing 5 shows a week, or did you finally cut back? Or how are you coming up with stuff 5 shows a week?
Right now, we're 3 shows a week. The 19th, we go back to 5 shows a week. Yeah. I mean, right now, what we're focusing on is position group breakdowns, right? I think there's no real natural time to do that, on a full-time basis when things start getting more hectic. So it's been a good chance to kind of, look at some of the wild cards going into training camp, what positions are actually available to be had, and just kind of evaluating the depth of the Chargers positions. Because I think as people have seen, a lot of ESPN top 10 lists coming out, right? Joey Bosa made it on the edge rusher one. Mm-hmm. That's been it so far. So I definitely think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, it's the dead period when even the big networks are just doing listicles and rankings and all that good stuff, which is fine. Which is it's
somebody ranked Aaron Donald 4th. Had him as their 4th ranked defensive tackle. No, I knew that. I must have blew your mind.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that came out I think right after. So I did a more Rams show on Monday, and I think that came out right after we did it, or else we had talked about it. It's like, what is that? What other 3 interior? I mean, there's some good interior guys, but what other 3 guys are you putting above Aaron Donald? I don't get that.
Yeah, I think they had Stephon Tuitt number 1, but I mean, track record has to count for something. I know Tuitt had a good season. Aaron Donald, I mean, best we've ever seen at the position.
Yeah,
conversation for a Rams
pro
show,
every year, but his rookie season. So
yeah.
Anyway, so Chargers camp coming up, like you said, 17 open practices. Can't wait. Hopefully, are you gonna make it, Tinny? Make it up to?
Oh yeah, for sure. I definitely will be up there. I don't know in what capacity or on what dates I'll be up there yet. But I'll definitely make it up there for sure. And I'll definitely tell everyone.
LAFB is going to be well represented because we got, you coming up. Obviously, Gilbert and Fernando, who do the Compas on the Beat podcast right here on the LAFB Network, will be there with their other respective gigs. I think Dan and Jake are going from Chargers Unleashed. I'll be there. I think Steven's going to be going as a contributor. So we're going to be well represented at Chargers Camp for the LA Football Network. That was my dream of doing this, and it's kind of cool seeing it all come to fruition. Excited to see you.
Will any of us get to the other side of the fence, though, besides Gilbert, and Fernando? That's the big question.
I think so. I won't spoil anything, but I'm pretty confident something will happen. So speaking of camp here, a lot of fun battles. We kind of talked pre-air. We don't know if any are really going to be for that starting spot necessarily. It's not like a QB battle. Like even last year where, everything pointed to Tyrod Taylor starting, but there was still the maybe chance that Justin Herbert squeaked him out in camp. We don't really have that this year. So I guess more so it's for those like secondary positions or backup positions or depth positions. So just right off the top here, what are a few of these battles that you're kind of really looking forward to not only see how they play out, but just as a content creator, just someone to really break down what happens on a day-to-day basis? What are a few of these battles you're looking forward to?
Yeah. So like we said, I mean, even me and you said, maybe the number one spot that is a starting position up for grabs would be the third corner. And I mean, when you're Brandon Staley's defense, 80% of the time you're going to have 3+ corners right on the field. So I think that is a legitimate starting position. And I think that's right now between Brandon Faison, who's a guy who undrafted has kind of stuck around in a depth position for the Chargers, has gotten picked on a little bit when he's been on the field. And then in comes Asante Samuel Jr. During the mandatory camps, Faison was getting the number one reps. Ryan Smith, the special team guy, special teams ace that they brought in from the Buccaneers, he was getting reps defensively. But the number one guy was Faison. That's the position you think, hey, Asante Samuel Jr., if he can, handle this learning curve, if he can get up to speed fast enough. And if you listen to the coaching staff, they say he asks all the right questions, next level questions, NFL bloodlines, all of those things. But that's a starting position that's up for grabs at this point, even though I expect him to be, a large role right away, whether that's sub packages or whatever the case is. I think he will get on the field a lot this season. But the other roles, I think are really, really interesting too, because the third wide receiver role and the way that the NFL works these days, that's almost a quasi starting position, right? So I wrote an article about this for LA Football Network about who I thought it was going to be. And I said it was Tyron Johnson, if you haven't read it yet. But there's a lot of reasons why, right? Jalen Guyton had the chance to be the guy last year as the number 3 wide receiver, got a ton of snaps, led the Chargers wide receivers in snaps, but wasn't very effective with those. Only caught about 50% of the passes he was thrown. On a yards per route run basis, Tyron Johnson was a top 10 efficient route, wide receiver in the league as far as the catches he's making on the routes he's running, which admittedly wasn't very much. But I think you have those two guys who are like the incumbents, and then you throw in a Josh Palmer who's supremely talented and is going to be doing anything he can to kind of carve out a role for himself. I think those are the position groups right now. And then I think there's a ton of other ones too, just on the surface level. Running backs, right? And we know Austin Eckler, who's behind him, who's going to make the team there. A lot of questions on the defensive line. Who's the next safety on the field right now? Is it Alohi Gilman? I mean, that would be a scary thought for a lot of Charger fans. A lot of really big questions, I think, as far as, who these key roles are going to go to, because if you're a Chargers fan, injuries happen. Who's the next guy that's going to step up?
Yeah. So I pulled up your article on the screen for those that want to check it out. Obviously, always great stuff you put out, great writing, all that. But yeah, focusing just quickly on the receivers, since you brought them up as well, and you said you like Tyron Johnson as winning that 3 spot. What are the odds you think that Josh Palmer can really show out in camp and be that 3? Do you think it's still a little too early? Obviously rookie receivers, sometimes it takes a while to get really acclimated. Do you like him better kind of shadowing a Tyron Johnson, coming in when needed, but not being forced in that 3 spot? Or do you think there's a shot he really just balls out and he becomes the 3 guy and then Tyron is still kind of that role, the deep threat kind of guy that he was last year?
That's a great question, and I think it's convoluted a little bit just because we don't know what the offense is going to look like, right? So, all we've heard about is offensively and defensively, there's going to be matchups. If the defense does this, the offense is going to try to expose it this way, and vice versa. Defensive matchups are a fun thing, like always. And if Justin Jones, I think, just talked about that. We know if this happens, we do this. That's comforting as someone who watched the Gus Bradley defense over the last couple of years. But flipping it back over, I think it would be more like, is he on any, what amount of packages can he get into, right? Can he get into 2 or 3 of these packages? Can he get it to where it's him and Mike Williams on the outside, Keenan Allen running out of the slot? Because Keenan Allen can play on the outside. I mean, if he was primarily a slot receiver, he'd be the best slot receiver in the league. So, like, there are ways he can get on the field, even though him and Mike Williams, he's the Mike Williams replacement, all those things. I don't think he's just that. I mean, the way he sets up his routes, I mean, some of the videos that even came out this week of him at the Senior Bowl just leaving, a Florida DB in the dust as he walks in for a wide open touchdown. I mean, the guy has skills to get on the field. I don't know if it'll be, hey, he's the starter at that position, but to have packages with him ready to go, I definitely think that's something he can and potentially will earn during training camp and even potentially in some preseason games, which could change things this year, right? We'll actually get to see him on the field before he actually, before it counts. We never got that with Justin Herbert. We never got that with Kenneth Murray. We'll get that with Josh Palmer, and I think those reps will be super important for him, and I think it'll be super interesting for Charger fans to watch, like, all right, let's see what this guy can do, because he's going to get some run. He has, a backup in Chase Daniel who should be able to adequately, show his skills if him and Justin Herbert aren't on the field at the same time, which hopefully we don't see too much of Herbert in the preseason. But this coaching staff, you told me very early on, Brandon Staley doesn't play favorites, right? Like, you're an undrafted guy and you're better than the 3rd-round pick that's on the field, he's going to find a way to get you on the field. So I think that makes me excited that, hey, he's going to have every chance to do it. And they're not going to not give him the spot just because he's the new guy, right? So I think he definitely has a chance to impress a lot of Charger fans and be a part of the offense this year.
I think that's what's most exciting is what's different from the last regime is, there won't be there's no seniority, if you will, based on draft stock or money you make or who management might want you to play. It's the best players will play, no politics, anything like that. And so we'll see guys on the field that maybe we wouldn't have saw in years past. Last thing with the receivers here, obviously drafted 2 just last year in Joe Reed and KJ Hill. So if we say Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, and Tyron Johnson are kind of your 4 for sure. Then you have Jalen Guyton that, had some good games last year, had some drop issues, but still played fairly well. So you would like to think he would be 5. I mean, do the Chargers keep 7 receivers, or do you think one of those guys will for sure probably be cut and hopefully relegated to the practice squad if they don't get picked up? But it's very hard to see a world where they have 7 receivers on this roster with a lot of other positions they need to add depth to as well, especially with the injury history with this team. So what do you think one of those, KJ Hill or Joe Reed, could be gone? Do you think Jalen Guyton could be the guy out? I mean, what do you see with the depth there at receiver?
The Jalen Guyton part of it is really interesting because I've talked about this before, but I think that the thought process, or the logic going around is that it is Joe Reed, right, or KJ Hill. The interesting thing is late round draft picks, right, don't come with that certain credence that they're going to have to kind of make the roster because it's a big investment that you have to keep. Now you're talking about 5th and a 7th round draft pick with Joe Reed and KJ Hill respectively that were from a different regime, right? So like those guys you'd have to just think off the top, okay, well, we don't know if Brandon Staley, Joe Lombardi, Shane Day are going to see the same things in those 2 guys that you saw, with someone that they brought in, like a Josh Palmer or a guy you've actually seen do it on the field in Jalen Guyton. Obviously, Jalen Guyton brings a speed that none of the 3 guys of Josh Palmer, right, or KJ Hill or Joe Reed bring. He has that blazing speed, but you have someone that can almost match that in Tyron Johnson that's about the same between those guys. How many guys do you just need to burn? Because Jalen Guyton's not a refined route runner, does have some drop issues. He wasn't effective given a pretty big role in the offense last year. He would be a wild card for sure. I mean, if he ended up not making it, KJ Hill, Joe Reed did, I mean, I'd be like, hey, this coaching staff is going what they believe in, right? They're not just doing it to do it. The bigger thing to me is before they had a role for a guy like Jeremy Davis to be a special teams player, to be a gunner, to be out there on kickoff, all of those things. Are KJ Hill or Joe Reed going to do that? Because Joe Reed last year was brought in to be a kick returner, lost the job to Nazir Adderley. Now Nazir Adderley is the only free safety as I see it on the roster. Maybe he gets those, privileges revoked now, and maybe they give Joe Reed another shot at it. KJ Hill was a fine punt returner who muffed a punt last year and was just pretty solid and nothing better or worse than that the rest of the times he caught the ball. You're not keeping 7. I don't believe they'd keep 7 by any means. I think it's 6. Can those guys, perform on special teams? Because I think at a certain point, it's not just what are you going to do for me offensively. And Joe Reed, I think, there's an interesting conversation to be had there about they didn't really use him, but when he got the ball in his hands last year offensively, he was good with it. He was used as like a utility kind of player coming in, and that's what we thought his role would be, but was an active, healthy scratch last year. So
yeah,
that's going to be really interesting. I do think it'll end up being either between KJ Hill and Joe Reed, but I think a lot of that's going to have to do with not just being a receiver, but what they're doing on special teams.
Exactly. And I can't remember if it was Lynn. I think it was Anthony Lynn last year who compared him to like Percy Harvin, but then never used Joe Reed. So that was always interesting. And it's really hard to predict anyway, but when you have a complete coaching overhaul, it makes it even harder because you just don't know how they're going to use guys. I really see Joe Reed, just because of what his skill set was at Virginia, making this team in some capacity. I just think he wasn't given really, I don't want to say a fair shake, but really wasn't given a shake at all. And if he's able to really, like you said, do good things on special teams, be the return guy that he was drafted then, that Telesco, who's still in the department, saw him as, and then now if, their new special teams coordinator and Brandon Staley and all these guys can get him to do what they want him to do, then I think he can have a place. KJ Hill will be interesting because, it's kind of, to me, it's him versus Jalen Guyton. I know they're very different kind of skill sets in a sense. But I just think Joe Reed can give you more in other areas, whereas KJ Hill and Jalen Guyton, I think that'll be who will be the vying for that final 6th spot. But it'll be interesting. One of them will probably end up on another team if they make it, if they don't make it through waivers. So I don't think their careers by any means will be done. But keeping it on the offense, running backs, obviously Austin Eckler, the incumbent, and then there's a lot of questions after him. I know that I've seen a lot of, we'll call it hate, a lot of hate on Joshua Kelly on Twitter these past few days as a potential cut candidate, which deservedly so. Had a very poor rookie showing. Not great efficiency. Obviously had the fumbles, ended up being a healthy scratch down the stretch. Was not great on special teams. It's a guy I still believe in. I mean, it's hard to move on past a guy after one season with now a brand new coaching change and regime. Justin Jackson, obviously, I think is the incumbent number 2 back, but the guy just can't stay healthy, unfortunately. And then you draft a guy in Larry Roundtree out of Missouri that there's a lot of excitement about. So obviously you're not keeping 4 running backs either. That's another position you're not seeing. Your hope is one of those guys can slide through and be on the practice squad, but who's the odd man out in your eyes out of those 3?
I mean, I think unless Larry Roundtree just doesn't show up at all, right? I think it has to be between Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly, just because Austin Eckler off the board, right? Yeah. As far as pure runners, Justin Jackson might be the best one of the group, right? And I also think he'd be a good fit for an outside zone running scheme, just because it's like if he finds that crease, if he gets to the second level, he's a nightmare for safeties, for corners to get a hand on, right? So he's really good there, comes with all the injury baggage. Like if Justin Jackson pulls his hamstring, right, during this training camp, trying to show up, and show out for this new coaching staff to show what he can do, that's not good for him, right? Because it could be between him and Josh Kelly. This is the other thing about Josh Kelly is, like, you've heard Daniel Popper, you've heard other kind of whispers come out that Joshua Kelly was the best offensive player last year in training camp for the Chargers. Like, things like that have been said. So, like, the fact that people think that it's unheard of for him to be able to come in here now and impress these coaches again to where they're going to have to keep him on the roster, I mean, he could absolutely do that, right? We don't know where his confidence is at, because you want to talk about like a player's confidence. You never see the stark contrast that you saw from Josh Kelly last year, where the guy comes in, looks like he's exactly what you needed. A guy who can pick up some tough yards, a guy who was very good after the catch in the running game. A few fumbles happen over a couple of games, and then he's like the bottom 3 least efficient running backs in the NFL last year. Other thing with that is, though, the Chargers were a terrible rushing team in general. So although Josh Kelly, gets the "he's terrible" tagline, there was a lot of, Austin Eckler, Justin Jackson, Kalen Ballage carries that looked a lot similar to those, Joshua Kelly carries, because they had a poor offensive line. Their rushing attack was one of the worst in the NFL, and they weren't set up for success, right? I mean, the philosophy of, hey, it's 3rd and 1, we're going to run the ball every time, and we don't care if you know it. You know what that's going to wreck? Your average yards per carry, because every time you're out there, you're trying to gain 1 yard to get a first down. So, and they weren't getting it most of those times. A lot of those were, hey, my offensive line versus your defensive front. and we'll see what happens kind of thing. That was one of the most frustrating things from that, regime. And it seemed like it even superseded Shane Steichen and what he wanted to do to some extent offensively. But yes, he was really bad. I don't think that that's going to really hurt him going into this camp. I do think this coaching staff will go into it with an open mind. A 6th round pick and Larry Roundtree is not the end all be all of if he has to make that roster, right? I mean, there's a chance he doesn't make it. The one thing you do give him, though, is they picked him for a reason, right? They obviously envision him in some sort of role.
And
so,
his coaching staff picked him for
exactly.
a reason. Yeah.
He's the only running back that this coaching staff has brought in, literally. So I think that that's the other thing he has going for him. But to say Joshua Kelly just, kind of going to miss the cut, so to speak, I don't think that's going to happen at all.
Yeah, maybe it's just some bias for me since I covered him at UCLA and, his final season. Yeah, I have a little bias in a lot of things. It's hard to cover 4 teams and you have guys that end up playing for said teams that you cover. But seeing his final year at UCLA, which the offense was really inconsistent, but he was the one consistent factor, 5.5 yards per carry, over 1,200 yards on an extremely inexperienced offensive line. It's funny now going into this season, UCLA has got one of the top offensive lines in not only the Pac-12, but college football because it's a freshman class. It's all come up together and all have stayed. But his final year, they were all freshmen. It was a super young offensive line. He still put up those statistics, and obviously college and the NFL are different. But I think that when we saw him in week 1 have 8 carries for 60 yards, saw him in week 2, same thing, 60 plus yards. And then all of a sudden in week 3, we saw the fumble. Week 4, we saw another fumble. And then kind of the rest was history.
Well, another thing is none of them have it's easier with the wide receivers because it's what kind of wide receivers they are, right? You have some speed guys, Tyron Johnson, Jalen Guyton. You have route runners KJ Hill. You have specialists like a Joe Reed, kind of thing. With the running backs outside of Austin Eckler, I don't know if any one of those dudes brings one elite skill set, right? They could be well-rounded backs, and that's what Josh Kelly is. I mean, best case scenario, he's just a very well-rounded back who can catch passes out of the backfield, who can get you 4 to 4.5 yards per carry, and you'd be totally happy with that out of a 4th round pick. But none of those guys bring you don't have a burner. You don't have, a guy that's just power all the time and is going to get you that 1 yard every time or whatever. So it is a little bit more muddled in that sense, just because none of the guys do bring one elite aspect to the table.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's going to be that's going to be one of my battles I'm looking forward to most, and definitely watching when we're at camp and hoping to get a bunch of those guys on some shows here. I'm sure your show as well, and just kind of talk to them about the competition. And I know they're all buddies now. And, that's what I love about covering these guys is off the field, they're all friends, but on the field, it's I got a job to win. If I'm predicting in July off the top of my head, I just think Justin Jackson will be the odd man out just based on, because like you said, it's going to be a clean slate for all these guys. But the one thing that's not necessarily a clean slate is injury history. I mean, that's something that you take into account. And unfortunately, with how good and efficient he can be, the best ability is availability. And he just hasn't been that. And when you have guys, obviously Larry Roundtree being a rookie, but Joshua Kelly has been relatively healthy. But we'll see. It's going to be fun to watch. So I'll just put you on the spot. Who do you think's the odd man out?
I mean, the thing is if I'm a betting man, right? I mean, if I was putting money on it right now, do I have the confidence that Justin Jackson's going to make it through the entirety of training camp healthy, right? I don't know if I would put me in my house on that if I had to pick, right? So it's if you're putting a gun to my head right now, I would give the edge to Joshua Kelly just because I've seen one really impressive performance. I've seen a smaller track record, even if it's a less impressive one. At what point is Justin Jackson is what he is, right? He had 6 weeks, 1 season leading the NFL in rushing yards, per carry. But that's it. We have small windows. That game, you have the Steelers game from a few years back where his coming out party ends up being a big part of the comeback there. But it's only been in these little flashes. We've never seen it consistently. So when is it okay, we've tried it. It didn't work. Let's try something different, right? And I think this coaching staff has done a lot of things differently, and a lot of it has been about trying new things. He could be a bystander of that. I think he's the more talented running back purely just as far as a ball carrier goes, as far as being elusive, making people miss. But he's also, has the biggest injury questions out of the entire group. And, being able to stay on the field is very, very important. Yeah. So, I guess if I had to put money on, I'd probably say Josh Kelly, even though if they both stay healthy, I think it'd be a little closer.
Josh Kelly making it. Justin Jackson coming out. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So I hope it doesn't come down to injuries, because obviously you just want to see these guys be successful. And, Justin Jackson's an awesome dude and, great character guy, and does a ton off the field. So I'd hate to see him leave LA, but we'll see. It'll be a fun competition. That's for sure. And one that hopefully at least through training camp, everyone makes it unscathed health wise. So, Dan, jumping over to defense a little bit, you already kind of touched on the corners and who we look at, CB3 and what could happen there. So let's talk a little more safety, because this is the one position that a lot of fans have been concerned about the depth. You mentioned it. Alohi Gilman may be considered, safety number 3 with the depth. I honestly love Mark Webb out of Georgia, even though he's a 7th-round pick. I think he will see the field a lot. I've talked about it before. He just has that Brandon Staley mentality, if you will. It reminds me of almost like a Jordan Fuller, who the Rams took last year in the 6th round, ended up being the starter week 1. So I think Mark Webb is going to be a lot more involved in this defense than a lot of people think off the bat. But what's kind of your thoughts on this safety group so far, and how you see the depth working out, but also how you see the versatility between the safeties and the corners? Because I've also said that I think in Brandon Staley's defense, it's more of a defensive back. It's not a safety. It's not a CB. Guys move all over the place. So kind of what's your thoughts, though, on this safety group?
Yeah, I mean, and he, Brandon Staley himself has tried to make sure that everyone just calls them DBs, right? And I think that's the biggest question is, can you be as versatile as you want to be if you don't have other guys that you feel comfortable with filling the position that other player is vacating? For example, can you have Nazir Adderley play, nickel corner? Can he be the star player, right? Can he go do that? If he's doing that, who's the free safety? And I think the free safety, strong safety thing is a little bit less than it would be, in Gus Bradley's defense, where one had a very specific role next to the line of scrimmage. One was the deep safety, responsible for a lot of things on the back end. Now it's just 2 safeties. The free safety, strong safety thing doesn't really matter as much, because both are going to have less responsibilities. Both are cutting the field in half, so to speak. So I think that if you feel confident about Mark Webb being back there, then yeah, you can play around with, Derwin James going and playing star or money or something like that. And you can have Nazir Adderley and Mark Webb back there. I have a hard time projecting just generally. I mean, you don't know what you have in college players till you see him. Yeah. The track record with Brandon Staley, hey, did he get the guy that he wanted, right? Mm-hmm. Was he fine with taking Mark Webb in the 7th round? I don't know. We don't know how high he was. We don't know if he just missed out on somebody right before that. Either he could be a, an instant contributor. But with Mark Webb, the coverage is the biggest thing with me, right? I mean, that's the place he had the most issues in college. I really like him as a tackler, right? I really like his instincts. Like, he'll make a decision, he'll go up and he'll make a play. Whether, he makes the play or not, he's quick to be instinctual and know what he wants to do. And I think that's what Brandon Staley likes about it. The one thing that gives me solace as Mark Webb is Brandon Staley, what's his philosophy? He wants to create one-on-one matchups with the front 7 and the defensive line, and he wants to create 2-on-1 matchups in the passing game. So it's not like you're asking Mark Webb, if he's the free safety, to be the one deep cover guy and get to both sideline to sideline in coverage, right? Like you would have to see if he was potentially in Gus Bradley's defense last year. I think now, if you can kind of cover him in that way, where you can just have him have some help, right? He's not responsible for a ton, but he has one very specific thing. Okay, I can maybe get behind that, but I think it's one of the biggest question marks on this team, because I do think if you want to be versatile, guys are moving around. Who's taking whose position? Have we seen that player do that and succeed? That's hard to wrap your mind around before you have actually seen it on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can speak here, to Mark Webb, and I mentioned a Jordan Fuller comp somewhat. That was Jordan Fuller. One of his knocks coming out of Ohio State was he was not great in coverage, but he was great above the shoulders, great football IQ.
Well, that's all they talked about with Mark Webb. Great coaches, what I mean? That played a huge part of them taking him, is how well they thought he was coached. Same with Trey McKitty, even though the stats didn't necessarily show someone that you would be excited about.
Exactly. So that excites me, because we saw how great of a season Jordan Fuller had and his role as he played more of the deep safety role with the Rams. And we could see that in Mark Webb. And the other thing I looked at is I did a film study on Asante Samuel, and it hasn't been talked about a lot, and it wasn't like he played it often, but there were times he lined up as the free safety at Florida State. And so I would not be shocked at all seeing him even drop back. And if you can have, Derwin, Nasir Adderley, and Asante Samuel, and 3 other, I mean, they're going to run a lot of 6 and 7 DB sets. and these guys are going to be all over the place. So that's an option too, is having Asante back deep as the free. So a lot of intrigue around that position, and it'll be a lot of fun to see once they're actually on the field. I'm sure they won't show a lot in training camp, just because they don't want to, or at least they won't show a lot in the media time when you can actually like take pictures and film, because I don't want to give too much away. But I can remember at Rams camp last year, obviously I wasn't at Rams camp, but talking to other beat reporters who were there, and just the excitement of what Brandon Staley's concepts were in the secondary. Like that was the specific thing everyone talked about, was his concepts in the secondary and what he was doing with Jalen Ramsey and John Johnson and Jordan Fuller and Terrell Burgess. And so now taking that over to the Chargers, I'm excited to see these concepts in person about what he does to the secondary, which is, I know a lot of, we've said it before, a lot of people are a little worried about the safety position, but I'm telling Charger fans, don't worry. All will be well, I think. I think all will be well with this position.
I mean, I'm glad you're confident in it. And I think
maybe I'm too confident. I don't know. But I'm
well, the biggest thing is like, hey, if you tell me that Nazir Adderley and Derwin James are going to play the entire season,
yeah,
I'm fully confident in the, in the safety position for the Chargers. Do I know that if one of those two dudes goes down, I feel good about, Mark Webb or Alohi Gilman taking over that position full time because they're the next guys up on the roster? I'd be lying to you if I said I was confident in that, just because I have to see it. But to think that Mark Webb could, outshine his 7th round draft position and find a role in the defense, that's not crazy to me at all, because there are some things he does really well. And with Brandon Staley specifically, like I talked about this on the show the other day, we know what some of the guys don't do well on the Chargers, right? Nobody knows that better than Brandon Staley. Like he knows what these guys are good at, where they lack. Yes, maybe, an offensive coordinator is able to surprise him and put one of his guys that he knows their flaws in a bad situation. But on a consistent basis, you can at least hope that Brandon Staley is going to put these guys in the positions to succeed. And when I think about that, it's minimizing the flaws in their game, right? If you think Mark Webb isn't great in coverage, he's going to put him in situations where he's not the sole defender on Travis Kelce going man to man, right? So, that's the one place I do have trust. Is Brandon Staley not just getting the most out of guys like Derwin James and Joey Bosa, but when injuries do inevitably happen, knock on wood, he's going to get more out of the guys you were seeing a huge drop-off from before under the Lynn regime, under the Mike McCoy regime. That has so much to me with being a good coach, is not what you're doing when the good players are out there, right? It's how do you adjust when things don't go the right way, right? Everyone has a plan until you're punched in the mouth. I think that's somewhere where the Chargers are getting significantly better, because I do think that even though it's year one of Brandon Staley's roster, right, it might not be in the way he totally envisions it at this point. We don't know how happy he is because he's getting a lot of returning players to this team. But when guys do inevitably get hurt, I think we're going to see less of a drop-off, less of a dramatic drop-off, because before, perfect example, Brandon Faison gets thrown there on the outside. Still a cover 3 defense. No help's coming, Brandon Faison. So when you see a team go at him and run 7-yard curl routes, right, and do that 4 times in a row for first downs or setting up 2nd and 2s, Gus Bradley's not going to change everything to help Brandon Faison. So, that's the biggest thing now, is it's like, if Brandon Staley sees something's not working, he's going to try something, right? He's going to do something differently. He's going to know, hey, I need to give this guy a little bit of help right now because they're picking on him. And that's, I think, where we're going to see Brandon Staley really, really surpass the coaches we've seen from the Chargers in the past.
And that's what, for us that cover the team, it's going to be so fun, is watching from first half to second half of each game, because things will change dramatically.
Halftime adjustments, I haven't associated the Chargers with that for a long time.
It'll be the exact opposite. Whereas the Chargers were great in the first half and then fell apart defensively in the second half, it'll be the exact opposite. We might see some early struggles early on and then just clamp down in the second. And I can't wait for this Chargers team to play a Gus Bradley-led Raiders defense, or maybe a Ken Wisenhunt-led Raiders defense, since that was the graphic the team put up for their coaching hire.
How has that happened so many times? Especially recently, like Joe Barry is also Brandon Staley, right? At one point, it's just how did major publications make these mistakes? You know where you'll never see that? The LA Football Network.
That's right. We don't mess that up.
Undefeated so far.
Undefeated. That's right. Here's a thought, I guess, or I don't know how much you guys have gotten into this yet on your position breakdowns and whatnot, but obviously going into the season before the staff was brought in, you would think the incumbent linebacking core would be, Kenneth Murray, Drew Tranquill, and probably Kaiser White. Now switching to a 3-4 base, which again, they play a lot of not in base, roughly 85% of the time. They're not going to be in true base, but typically you have your 2 inside backers and you'll have more DBs or your edge guys. So it's rare where we will see Murray, Tranquill, and White all on the field at the same time. So that being said, do you see, in your opinion, again, I don't know how much you've gotten into, but do we see more of a Tranquill, again, this is all health pending, but a Tranquill and Kenneth Murray inside core with Kaiser kind of just being a filling guy, or even maybe, he has some safety history in college adding to that safety room that no one's really talking about, that maybe he adds depth there too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about, a couple of former safeties, right? Do we see Drew Tranquill potentially in that role float back there a little bit? I mean, he's another former safety at Notre Dame. Kazir White was a safety pretty much the whole time at West Virginia, but that's how I see it. I mean, 4 linebackers in the 3-4, 2 of those are edge rushers, right? And I don't know if the only guy that would potentially fill that role in an experimental type of situation on the outside would be Kenneth Murray. And we've heard that they view him as an off-ball linebacker. They don't view him as an edge player, even though I think he'll be more aggressive by 1,000% than he was last season. But I do think it is Drew Tranquill and Kenneth Murray. I mean, I like Kazir White, and he's going into his 4th and final season of his rookie deal. And I think last year really in coverage too, like the ball skills didn't show up maybe as much as they should have, because he was really close to making a few plays where it's like, that's going to go down as him giving up a 30-yard game. But like for 95% of the route, he was in perfect position. I think that happened a lot to Kazir White. And this is, with the linebackers, my biggest thing is coverage, right? I mean, the last season, so in the last season, each of those linebackers have played, because we just talked about this on the show. We broke down linebackers this week. Each one of them gave up a passer rating allowed of over 108 in their last full season. So like, that's not the end all be all, but it wasn't great, right? I mean, even Drew Tranquill, I think we can kind of remember him in a more glorified way, because he did play 2 seasons ago, and he did come in as a rookie, played, not starting from the beginning of the year when it was Thomas Davis. That's the other exciting thing. Hey, we're going from, Thomas Davis and an off-injured Denzel Perryman to really having a young stable of linebackers who still have to do it, but you can at least be hopeful about, right? You can at least have, get excited about these young guys. This is I think it's Drew Tranquill, Kenneth Murray. Those are the 2 inside guys. But if Kazir White is a backup for you, that's not a big deal, right? Like, maybe he comes in to play safety or not, but to have someone you feel pretty good about being in a reserve role for a guy, and Drew Tranquill that missed the entire season last year, and Kenneth Murray who's coming off of shoulder surgery, like, that's not a big deal. But this is the crazy thing about the Rams last year. They only kept 3 inside linebackers on their initial 53-man roster, right? So right now it's those 3 guys that we talked about, and Nick Niemann, the rookie, who we expect to play on special teams. Maybe that's the way he kind of, finds his role on the team. But if only 3 guys are making it, that would be a really interesting conversation, because obviously they knew that, before they drafted Nick Niemann, how they kind of felt about the position. But with what you're talking about as far as Kazir White, how he gets on the field, I don't see the immediate path for a big role. I think he was okay in coverage, but this is the other thing about the linebackers is we think of them in coverage, but we've never seen them in coverage in Brandon Staley's defense. And I think that is a huge distinction between that, right? Because dropping into a zone coverage where you're responsible for guys running left and right and trying to figure out, who do I keep? Who am I sticking with? That can be a lot tougher than, hey, you have the running back in the flats, go tackle him if he catches the football, right? Like, and I think that's more of what we'll see in capacity of, the Chargers linebackers covering dudes. It's not Drew Tranquill running down the middle of the field against Tyreek Hill like it was under Gus Bradley. Because, like, Kenneth Murray, like, he didn't ever drop in his own coverage. And, like, now even with Brandon Staley, like, you don't want to see Kenneth Murray's back. If you see Kenneth Murray's back, something has gone wrong. You want to see his face mask. You want to see him getting downhill like they've talked about. But when he was at Oklahoma, when I was watching his tape, there's like 4 or 5 plays that I think I'll just right off the top of my head where he's screaming into the flats and tackling a running back right as he catches the ball for a 5-yard loss, right? Like on a little flare pass or something. So, like, even though he was bad in coverage last year, this is a different defense. It'll be more man coverage, I think, and he'll be given more realistic opportunities. So I do think, even though coverage is the biggest thing for me right now, I think this group can be much improved.
Yeah, and we talked about it earlier, but how big matchups will be, because there'll be times when I mean, so that, for instance, last year, for those that didn't watch the Rams, had those three backers. We saw Troy Reeder, Micah Kaiser, and Kenny Young all play in different parts of the game. Some of it was injury. Obviously, Micah Kaiser did get injured at one point in the year, but they kind of had a rotation of them three. It wasn't like, okay, you're our two starters and you're playing 95% of the game. So we could see all these three guys in different situations depending on who they're covering or who is on the field against them, whether it's a great tight end like Travis Kelce, or whether it's a lesser known tight end that they're not really worried about in coverage. And the other thing I'm super excited about, I don't think anyone would argue that Kenneth Murray is much more athletic than Troy Reeder from the Rams. I don't think that's ever going to be an argument. And there was a game last year where Troy Reeder had 3 sacks from the inside because they schemed things up to get him, crashing down on the opposite side of Aaron Donald, and he got 3 sacks in that game. So I just think, yes, Kenneth Murray will not be used on the edge. He'll be used an off ball, but like you said, we'll definitely see him get aggressive on certain plays, get after the quarterback, and I would not be shocked at all if he has a 6+ sack season from the inside, plus over 100 tackles. And I mean, he's going to have a great season, and I'm just excited to see what this defense does. So,
and Brandon Staley too, real quick though, like even when they did that mic'd up thing, which I mean, I think every, LA football fan can agree that we'd all listen to a mic'd up Brandon Staley coaching session just for as long as they would let us, because hearing him out there with the guys and seeing him, take off the friendship hat in some ways, just be like, hey, like, we're friends, but like, let's get going now, huh? Like, start running on the field now, But his excitement when he was talking about a specific play where they're bleeping out, certain parts of the play so other teams can't pick it up. And then you have a guy like Kenneth Murray coming through the middle. Now what do you do, right? And I think that's not going to just help Kenneth Murray, but Joey Bosa, one of the most dominant edge rushers in the league. One of the things that came up in that top 10 list was just that he wasn't performing against double teams as well as some of the other guys that are up there on the list, right, as far as the top 10 edge defenders. But can you double team Joey Bosa if you think you have, no matter what you think of him as a pass rusher, Kenneth Murray in that athleticism screaming right next to him, one of the gaps, right? Now what do you do? Like, can you double team that now? Probably not. You're going to create those single team matchups. Maybe you shift the attention to Joey Bosa and just let like a rocket loose into the backfield. And Kenneth Murray, I mean, I think it's not just Kenneth Murray's, game that I think is going to get so much better this year, but like using him to make other players better. That's something we couldn't even really have thought about last year. And this year it's something that I'm most excited about.
Yeah. Football's all about mismatch, and this defense will create that in spades. So the last thing we'll touch on is, I think, the edge position. So since you brought it up, it's a perfect segue. Obviously, Bosa and Uchenna Nwosu are the incumbents, and I know the staff is very excited about Nwosu, and I am too. He's extremely efficient when he's been on the field, when he's given the opportunity, and when he's been healthy. So seeing him in a true starting role, I think will be fun. But after that, that's another position where the depth is kind of a little bit, people are leery about. Obviously, getting Kyle Frackwell out of New York, I think, is a good get for them, and we could see him have a pretty substantial role. But who are you looking at? Is it him as the next guy up? Is it Chris Rumph, the rookie out of Duke, that there's a lot of excitement about too, just a very raw player? But who outside of the big two on the edge are guys you're looking at to be those depth pieces that the Chargers need?
Well, if somebody gets hurt, I think that's where the biggest question is, because I think with Kyler Fackrell, I think it's kind of like what you talked about with the 3 linebackers that the Chargers had last year, where Kyler Fackrell is not going to be a starter, but it doesn't mean he's not going to have a role, even if Joey Bosa and Uchenna Nwosu end up staying healthy, right? Because he brings something a little bit different to the table. He is more of that stand-up outside linebacker who has handled those responsibilities in the past that maybe Uchenna Nwosu hasn't, right? So I think that will be his role off the jump, right? But Chris Rumph, that one's a little bit more interesting because he is not just a rookie, but an undersized rookie. And I think that he could have never stood up and played, Leo in Gus Bradley's defense, right? But can he be a stand-up outside linebacker where he's not going to be, put into a position where physically he's going to be overmatched? Because that was my biggest thing, is he slips a lot of blocks. Like, that's one of his specialties as far as in the running game, because that's where I would have the most concern if he was to take on any kind of consistent every game role. And I think if he did do that his rookie year, it's obvious passing down situations. Let him, walk up into a different gap, have him blitz from different places, or have him rush from different places from a standing up position. But him being able to handle the edge against an NFL offensive line, even NFL tight ends at this level, I think is something that will be a big challenge for him. So I think that the obvious guys are Uchenna Nwosu, Joey Bosa, those are the no doubt about it starters. I think Joey Bosa will be on the field all the time. I think that Nwosu could lose some snaps to Kyler Fackrell, but Chris Rumph is the ultimate X factor wild card for this unit because I don't really know what to expect. He definitely has some things that you like as far as being a pass rusher, as far as stopping the run. He can slip blocks, but he's not going to be able to hold up the edge in any kind of physical manner, not at, 240 pounds playing on the edge. So that'll be really interesting. I think it's an exciting unit. I love Uchenna Nwosu, and I think he's been criminally underused. But the depth, I do think it's fair to question what you're going to get out of those guys.
Yeah, that'll be another really interesting one. And again, what guys play in different roles. If we see some of those inside backers get kept because they can play both as depth pieces or something like that. So certainly will be fun. I think Chris Rumph is a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing how he performed. If he bulks up more, obviously you need to get, bigger NFL edge size. His personality is out of this world. So I think he's just going to be a ton of fun to watch and cover. Last question, Dan, and we'll get you out of here. Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers, also contributor to the LA Football Network. I'm going to put you on the spot, so I'll answer first, so it gives you a little more time to think about. But who do you will be, when training camp is said and done, the biggest winner of training camp? So I think, in my opinion, I think it's going to be Mark Webb for everything we talked about earlier, how smart he is, the intangibles he can bring, but just the fact that he was a 7th-round pick. There's not a ton known on him. Many fans probably forget he was even drafted because being 7th round, you're usually not talked about very often. But I just think he's going to have an ascension. I mean, maybe I'm drawing too many comparisons to what Staley did with the Rams, but there's something to be said for it. He's going to have a really big ascension similar to Jordan Fuller, I think, not necessarily being the starter, but just he will be on the field. He will be talked about a lot. I think there'll be a lot of excitement after camp. It's like, man, this guy they got in the 7th round all of a sudden is being a big contributor. So for me, I think the biggest winner in camp when it's all said and done will be safety out of Georgia, Mark Webb.
When I think for this discussion, right, you have to really kind of weigh what can be gained from this training camp, right? So I think with rookies who you've never seen on the field, they automatically have the most to gain because, like, there's certain guys, like, I think even the players on their own team could have a different thought about Nazir Adderley after this training camp, right? Where now he's in a little bit better positions. The balls he was a step late on, he's getting to now, right? And now he's making all these splashy plays, and everyone thinks of him in a different light. Same thing can be said about Jerry Tillery. There's a few different players who have a lot to gain and also have a lot to prove. But just from a perspective of how much can they gain during this, I got to go with Josh Palmer. I know it's a pick that you'll probably agree with just because that's going to be his chance to go out there and prove he can do it with the big dogs, right? And I think that realistically speaking, he's not starting off 7th on the Chargers wide receiver depth chart, right? Like, say what you want. The Chargers coaching staff likes him better than, some of the guys I'm sure they currently have on the roster to take him with a 3rd round pick when nobody necessarily thought he was going to be taken there. They did that for a reason. I mean, this is a well thought out plan that they have with Josh Palmer. And we've only seen Josh Palmer catching passes for the most part from some of the worst quarterback play I've ever seen in college football during his time at Tennessee. You all knew who else saw that? Derek Ansley, who's now the defensive backs coach for the Chargers, who I'm sure had a key role in bringing Josh Palmer in. I'm sure he was saying, hey, this dude was smoking every DB that we have every practice of all time. Like, I'm sure there was some of that coming out there.
I asked Josh Palmer that when he was on the show. I was like, how much do you think your old coach Ansley had on getting you to the Chargers? So
I remember that, yeah.
Professional, but
yeah. It's hard to get somebody to come out and say that. But, and even Derek Ansley was asked about it, right? And he's like, oh, they talked to me about it. Like, it was nothing really. I mean, it's like, okay. But, and like what he did, like, you can say what you want about his college stats, never had more than 500 receiving yards in a single season. Like, his stats are not good in college. So I think that's the thing where it's like, if you contrast that with what he could potentially do at this level, where I expect him to be much more productive than he ever was in college, and look at the games he had in college, right? I mean, he played against J.C. Horn. He played against Tyson Campbell. He played against Eric Stokes Jr. He played against Patrick Surtain II. Like, he played those dudes, and he was not out of place. And all those guys, went in the top 42 picks in the draft because that's where Asante Samuel Jr. went. All those guys that basically went in front of him, with a couple of exceptions, Josh Palmer roasted those dudes. Like, he had really, really good games against those players when he got those big time matchups. And that was with a wet noodle throwing him the football. So like, I think that he has a ton to gain because like right now he could be thought of as the 7th wide receiver, but could realistically be pushing for a role coming out of training camp, which for a 3rd round receiver, and receiver is a hard position to transition to. I know there's the exceptions, the Justin Jeffersons, the Odell Beckhams. It's not an easy position to make the jump. I think linebackers may be the toughest. Like I think you see young linebackers struggle all the time, but wide receiver is not tough. I think we're going to have a totally different view on Josh Palmer, who everyone is screaming at their TV, what the hell are the Chargers doing? Taking this guy in the 3rd round, we have wide receivers. I think that narrative is going to go away by the time training camp is over.
Yeah, I think it's already kind of gone for, the most faithful fans. I think people realize, oh, damn, this guy's pretty legit, pretty good. And all we've seen of him is past highlights and then a little bit of mini camp routes. So yeah, I love Josh Palmer, and I think he's
when that didn't happen with Trey Pipkins, right? When he was the 3rd round pick, everyone was outraged about like even like Justin Jones, like there's some very questionable 3rd round picks. Yeah. I've never seen Chargers fans kind of really take the medicine and kind of look at some different things. I'm proud of Charger fans for that because everyone was outraged by that pick. I think some of that still might be going to Trey McKitty, even though people seem to be coming around a little bit. But I think that narrative will be fully gone. The first video that comes out of him, roasting one of the Chargers DBs for a touchdown and him hooking up with Justin Herbert, I think that's going to go away pretty quick.
Yeah, we'll get stuff out there for sure with our coverage of training camp. So it was so fun being a part of Chargers Twitter during the draft and Rams Twitter because both had their meltdowns, and I was just enjoying both.
One very different spots too. Different spots. I mean, the Rams, like when you don't have that many 1st round picks, the spotlight's going on to everyone else, and that's the thing with Josh Kelly, right? Too, like real quick, is just like. It wasn't just that they took Josh Kelly in the 4th round, it's that they traded back up into the 1st round to get Kenneth Murray. So the Chargers fans had to miss an entire day 2 of the draft. Yeah. And the first thing they get back is a running back. And it's like, okay, like, we needed a corner in the 3rd round. We needed another, you know what I mean? So like that definitely puts a different kind of spotlight on it, especially when, you don't get as many picks. You better make sure you hit on the ones you do.
Exactly. So we'll see how that all plays out. Training camp is just about 20 days away or so. I think less than that, even like 18 till rookies report. So can't wait. We will have all your coverage right here on the LA Football Network. Dan Wade, co-host of the Locked On Chargers. You can find him on Twitter at Dan Talks Sports. And obviously right here on the LA Football Network as he's a Chargers contributor. So my man, thanks for the time. Great coverage as always. Appreciate you. The beard's looking fresh. So thanks for jumping on with me.
Hi, man. Hey, no problem. If you ever want the best looking writer from LA Football Network to come on and join the show, he's always down to do so.
Love it. Oh, dude, I got to show you before I go. Check out this shirt I got. Little LA Express from the USFL.
Oh, damn. That's an antique.
Yeah, we rep all LA football. It's all LA football.
Yeah, that's not an XFL Wildcats shirt, but No,
I know. I need to get one of those still. But I thought I'll get the LA Express first. So little Steve Young action.
That's how far our LA Football Network coverage goes back to that USFL days.
Yeah,
it was a long time, but a good time.
That was the amount of coverage. Was that little snippet? That was it. But hey, we still cover them. So, all right, brother. Well, appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and looking forward to seeing all the content you keep pushing out. So, take care. Be safe. Okay.
All right, man. Sounds good.
All right. Big thanks as always to Dan Wade. Great stuff. Great voice. Great beard. Got a lot of great bearded guys here on the LA Football Network. So thank you all for tuning in to the LA Football Podcast. This episode specifically brought to you by Manscaped. If you haven't checked out Manscaped yet, you absolutely have to. They have the new Lawnmower 4.0, which is just fantastic. It's waterproof now, so you can use it in the shower. It's got an LED light for precision guidance. The non-nick technology they use is truly just fantastic. So it's a great product that I use. All of us here at the LA Football Network use, and you should too. Great gift if you want to give it to a loved one, husband, father. Anyone can use it, really. So head to manscaped.com. Use my promo code LAFB20. You're going to get 20% off and free worldwide shipping on any products you buy. So make sure to head to manscaped.com today, LAFB20 for 20% off and free shipping. Tell them Ryan from the LA Football Podcast sent you. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to the LA Football Podcast. Another great show, another great guest. Excited as we keep building this platform up. like I said, training camp just a few days away. So we will be there in spades representing all of you guys. So let us know what content you want to see during camp. We'll make sure to get that out. And keep tuning in. Hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, all of it. We are there, and on YouTube at LAFB Network. We got all of our shows there if you subscribe to that channel. So we got the LA Football Podcast, you got Chargers Unleashed, you got Rams Brothers, you got Compas on the Beat, you got Take Back the West, you got the new Bruin Bible that we just added with Will Decker. First episode actually went up yesterday. So head to YouTube. Plus, we do video breakdowns and film reviews. So plenty of stuff there to fill all your needs for LA football content. So hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe out there. Hit me up on Twitter at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB, at LAFB Network is the main account. And I look forward to talking to everyone next week. Take care.